So in this PowerPoint in Chapter 17, we're looking at different ways we can form immunization, how someone can be immunized against a particular pathogen, as well as different types of immune system testing to really help us diagnose patients. We can diagnose an individual as having a particular disorder just based on their immune system reaction if they've been exposed to it or not. And so we're going to look at there we go, and I'm like, two different ways we can form immunization, active and passive, as well as different types of immune system testing, again, looking to really see if a patient has been exposed to some type of pathogen or not. Now, in the taping, we're going to get through active immunization because there's not much about passive. Everything else, the passive immunization as well as the immune system testing, we'll do in lecture. So we're going to start with different types of immunizations, the way we can form immunization. And there again is active immunization and passive immunization. Now, active immunization is administering antigens so that the patient will mount their own adaptive immune response. So we're exposing patients to some type of pathogen. Yes, we've modified it so that it doesn't actually cause the disease, but we're just exposing that, and then the patient will mount their own immune response. That's active. We're activating their immune system. Now, the passive immunization means that the patient or the individual acquires immunity through the transfer of antibodies, which means they don't make the antibodies themselves. They're given antibodies, and those antibodies were either formed in another immune individual or some other type of animal that can form antibodies. Now, examples of someone that's already developed immunity and has antibodies that they can give you. This happens when moms breastfeed. They can pass antibodies on to their infant. And I'm like, that's an example of a natural passive immunization. And I'm like, the baby didn't make the antibodies, but they got them from someone who did. And I'm like, the artificial, and I'm like, would be kind of the example with the snake bite venom, that you didn't make the antibodies after you've been bitten by a snake and are given venom, but you're given antibodies right away to combat that snake bite venom. So you don't make the antibodies, you're just given the antibodies in passive immunization. Now, this is showing what can happen, and I'm like, to a couple different diseases once we've actually developed different vaccines. Obviously, I'm like, you can see, I'm like, these were two different vaccines, both developed for polio, but after both of them, severe drop in the number of cases of polio. And I'm like, same thing with measles. As soon as we developed a vaccine, severe drop in the number of people that developed measles. So we were really trying to tackle all of these diseases. People are not getting these diseases that used to be common because we have vaccines against them. Our immune systems have now become immune to these various diseases. Now, we're going to tackle active immunization because there's several ways that, yes, we can activate the immune system. So there's different types of vaccines we can use to do that. Now, the first type of vaccine is called an attenuated or a modified live vaccine. It means we are using pathogens with reduced virulence to stimulate a strong immune response. Now, that means we are taking a live pathogen, whether it's a virus. I know viruses aren't technically alive, but it's living enough that it could cause problems. And I'm like, and we reduce its virulence. And I'm like, we change it somehow. It's called an attenuated because attenuation means reduced virulence. So we're going to change these pathogens somehow so that they don't actually cause the disease, even though it's still a living organism, whether it's a living bacteria, living quotes, and I'm like, living virus. A lot of times we treat these bacteria or viruses with radiation, changes them a little bit. They can't cause the disease, and I'm like, but yet they are still there in our body with all of their antigens triggering our immune system. Sometimes we can damage the capsule on a bacteria, or somehow we can change a bacteria so it can't make a toxin. And I'm like, either way, these make these organisms non-virulent. They can't cause the disease, but yet our body recognizes all the antigens, and we can actually mount a really strong immune response against it. Now, some downsides is you may still have some mild infections. And I'm like, people that get the live flu virus vaccine may still get some mild infections. And like, sometimes they feel kind of tired or groggy a day or two after they get that live flu vaccine. I don't know if they even really do that many live flu vaccines anymore, but it's still out there. Now, a cool thing that can happen when you get this modified live vaccine is because you do have this living organism in your body. Your immune system will get rid of it, but in the meantime, it activates the immune system. Is that you can actually spread your live vaccine to others by bodily fluids. Same way that people are spreading viruses and flus, they're not washing their hands and handshakes and touching their mouth and touching their eyes. Uh, Same way you can spread an actual flu, a live flu virus or a living type of pathogen, you can spread these modified organisms, these modified pathogens, by shaking someone's hand. And so you can actually spread your immunity. And so you were given a shot, and while your body's fighting it off, you can actually be spreading that pathogen to other people. It's not causing disease in them because it's a modified pathogen, but they actually develop immune system as well. So it's kind of, it's sometimes called herd immunity because you are literally, immunizing, quite a few people all at once by just immunizing a few. Now, the population that's susceptible to problems with this type of vaccine, with these living organisms, is pregnant women and people that have a weak immune system. And I'm like, pregnant women, because sometimes these living organisms, even though they can't cause disease, can still trigger problems with a fetus. And then if you have a weak immune system, the idea with these vaccines is that we can get rid of that pathogen. And I'm like, granted, it's not pathogenic anymore, it's not going to cause a disease, but your immune system can get rid of it and then mount a strong immune response so that you don't get it again. But if you already have a weak immune system or almost no immune system, it's going to be hard to get rid of that foreign object in your body and to develop that strong immune response. So in either case, they would not give you that modified live vaccine. They may give you another type. It's called an inactivated or killed vaccine. Now, there's two ways they can do that. There are whole agent vaccines or subunit vaccines. So I've got my bigger picture that kind of shows the difference. The whole agent is that you are given the whole, this is an example of a virus, and I'm like, you're given the whole virus. They have changed it, they have killed that virus, and I'm like, you can't, it can't change, it can't do anything, and I'm like, it is dead. And I'm like, they didn't just change it a little bit. So I'm like, that's the whole unit. So they're giving you the whole virus itself, but they have killed it or inactivated it so it can't reproduce, it can't do anything. A subunit means they just took small parts of that particular virus and then injected these into your body. So your body still recognizes these structures. And so if it sees something later that has those same structures, it can mount an immune response against it. And so it's just called subunit, it's just smaller parts. It's usually a little bit safer to administer, especially, again, immunocompromised and pregnant women. But, and I'm like, my little note, it's safer because it can't cause disease. There's no living thing in here. These can't reproduce. And I'm like, they can't get passed on. And I'm like, however, it does not elicit a strong immune response. It's usually a weaker immune response than giving someone a live disorder. Main reason is these things can't replicate in the body. If you're given, I go back and I'm like, if you're given one of these modified live vaccines, we're putting a live organism in the body. And as your body fights it off, this living organism is still going to reproduce. So your body is mounting a really strong response because you've got multiple things and they're growing. And so you need a big, strong immune response to fight it off. I'm like, if you're given something that's already dead or you're given subunits, I'm like, it doesn't replicate on its own. It's going to be kind of a quick way of our immune system getting rid of it. It's gone, doesn't need to elicit a strong immune response. And so usually for these types of vaccines, you're given multiple doses. And I'm like, just to get that full immune system response, you're going to need multiple doses. This is why a lot of times when people are getting vaccines, yes, it's a 3-dose vaccine because it's usually some type of inactivated or killed vaccine. Weak immune response, we kind of have to keep reminding our immune system about these things. Now, what can help is a lot of these, because there is that weak immune response, they've added adjuvants. It's a nice term to know, but adjuvants are chemicals that are added to somehow increase the effectiveness of the vaccine. Sometimes it's to make the vaccine last longer. It makes it a little more difficult for our immune system to get rid of those pathogens. Or, and I'm like, it could be a chemical that stimulates our immune cells. And so it's kind of like, hey, wake up, there's something coming, you're going to have to do something about it. Kind of like that morning coffee. Let's wake up our immune system so you might get a little bit stronger response than if you didn't have your morning coffee or didn't add an adjuvant. And then another type of vaccine, still all active immunization, is they're called toxoid vaccines. A lot of times it's not the pathogen that becomes a problem, it's the fact that some of these pathogens can make toxins. And so we can actually make or mount an immune response against the toxins and instead of the actual pathogen itself, because the bacteria, it's usually a bacteria, not an issue. The toxins the bacteria make become a deadly issue. So let's mount an immune response so that if your immune system recognizes these toxins that a bacteria may make, we can mount an immune response against the toxin, neutralize them, get rid of them, and we're good. So we modify the toxin so you're not given an actual toxin. We change it, and I'm like, so that your immune system recognizes it without actually being harmed. And it's going to stimulate that antibody-mediated immunity. It's going to stimulate the making of antibodies against these toxins. Now, toxins themselves, or these toxoids, don't have a lot of antigenic determinants. It's on my pictures, right on my word. Determinants, aka they don't have a lot of antigens on them, so they're not going to usually trigger a strong immune response. There's just not as many things that our immune system recognizes and will remember if it sees these toxins. And so they usually require multiple doses. Lots of booster shots. An example, tetanus, you usually need a booster shot. And I'm like, around every 10 years, although I hear some say 7, some say 8. Diphtheria usually also requires a booster. Again, it's not the bacteria that's causing a problem, but it's the actual toxin that these particular bacteria can make that causes a problem. And my last of my active immunizations for different types of vaccines, one is a combination vaccine, which means they just combine antigens from a whole bunch of various toxoids or inactivated pathogens, and they give them all to you right at once. And so they give them all to you simultaneously. Examples, MMR. If you know what MMR stands for, measles, mumps, and rubella, that means we are giving you, a combination of antigens from several different pathogens in one shot. Same thing with the Tdap shot. It's diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. And I'm like, again, it's all of these different toxoids and antigens from different pathogens, all given to you at once. It's convenient if you can do it all at once. Less shots that have to be given, more likely people will get them. Now, we can also make our own vaccines. We can use recombinant gene technology, aka we can start to make these different organisms do what we want them to. An example of one thing we can do is if we just want to make a whole bunch of an antigen to put in a vaccine to trigger someone's immune response, we can do that. We've got a little tiny bacteria in here. We can find on this bacteria's DNA the part of the DNA that makes this antigen. We can extract that DNA, put it into any cell we would like to, and then this cell starts to make these bacterial antigens, and it never did that before. And I'm like, but we're making a whole bunch of these bacterial antigens. And so now we can make large quantities of an antigen to put into a vaccine to trigger a patient's immune response. We can also delete a virulence gene and create a harmless pathogen. And I'm like, we can, if we know, and I'm like, that there is going to be, some type of antigen that might mount an immune response, we can insert that information into a plasmid, we can put it into other cells, and I'm like, and that in itself will trigger immune responses. We can change these things. We can literally take out different parts of DNA that we want. We can add in DNA that we want and change these organisms to make really great vaccines that are harmless to patients and yet do really good things to mount immune responses. Now, examples of a whole bunch of different vaccines that you may have had. And I'm like, and yes, when you are a kid and when you are a mom, you know about all these vaccines that you have to drag your kids into. But lots and lots of vaccines that they get, and I'm like, as their kids, because a lot of them require boosters. They don't mount a really strong immune response, so we have to kind of keep waking our immune system up and reminding them about them. But yes, at birth you start getting hepatitis B vaccines and then boosters. And I'm like, rotaviruses, the DTaP, the Haemophilus influenza type B, the pneumococcal, the polio vaccine. And I'm like, every year you'll start getting flu vaccines. You've got your MMRs, your Hep A, lots and lots of various types of shots, and lots of these have boosters that go along with it. Now, this is birth to 6, but it does not end there, because yes, there are still lots and lots of boosters you get as you start to get into your teenage years as well. And I'm like, and one that starts to show up now, starting around 11 or 12, is starting to get the first of the doses of the HPV vaccine as well. And it still doesn't stop there, because this goes up to 18. This is just showing you various vaccines that you can get every year, even as an adult. Recommendations of the doses, and I'm like, yes, they recommend the influenza vaccine every single year. They recommend the Tdap about every 10 years. The varicella usually recommend a couple boosters somewhere in your adult life. HPV, most likely you're still finishing up your doses. And I'm like, of your 3 doses around this time. This is against the shingles. Still recommend some more MMR, especially if there's outbreaks happening. The purple is just usually recommended if you possess some type of risk factor. Then I'm like, that puts you at an increased risk if you're traveling to certain areas or you're exposed to someone that may have this. You may need additional booster shots as well. So lots and lots of vaccines to keep our immune system up to speed and, working as great as it can. Now, the interesting part about where they make most of our vaccines. Yeah, they're made in labs, but the interesting part is, yes, they're usually mass produced in chicken eggs. And I'm like, most vaccines are for viruses, although we have bacterial vaccines as well, and we can culture those in bacteria, but most virus vaccines are grown in chicken eggs. Main reason for a virus to reproduce, it has to grow in a cell. Well, a chicken egg is one cell. It's like one of the biggest cells. For most of the cells in our body, we need a microscope to see the cells. Not a chicken egg. That is one cell, one really big cell. So we can grow a lot of viruses in chicken eggs. However, because these are grown in eggs, people that have allergic reactions to eggs may have allergic reactions to the vaccines. I'm like, this is the main reason why they ask before you get any type of vaccine, do you have an egg allergy? And for a lot of people, you had no idea why getting your flu vaccine and being allergic to eggs had anything in common, but this is why. And I'm like, because that flu vaccine was grown in chicken eggs and could cause an immune response. Now, that doesn't mean if you have an allergic reaction to eggs, you can no longer ever get any type of viral vaccine. We can grow these vaccines as well in other cells. A lot of times they have to special order the vaccines. Sometimes they're more expensive. Insurances can pay for it. And I'm like, but you can still get the vaccines. But that's the reason. So if people that have an egg allergy, don't be like, no, I don't have an egg allergy, and then get a vaccine. Because then you may actually have an allergic reaction. Now, vaccine safety, yes, and I'm like, everyone always says, oh, but are they really safe? One, and I'm like, the most common side effect for having a vaccine is that mild toxicity. You may feel tired and achy that day or the day after. It's really apparent in kids, especially when they get a whole slew of these shots. And I'm like, sometimes there's a really tiny risk of anaphylactic shock. That's normally when people are allergic to chicken eggs and then don't tell people that they're allergic to chicken eggs. They can go into anaphylactic shock because of that allergic reaction. Also, if you get an attenuated virus, which means they've just changed it a little bit, it's still a living bacteria or a living virus in the body. And I'm like, because it's still reproducing in the body, you can get some residual virulence, which means you may still get some symptoms of that particular pathogen before your immune system gets rid of it. But my big note on there is no data, no scientific data that vaccines cause autism, diabetes, or asthma. Now, main reason why people think, vaccines cause autism, well, I say two main reasons. One, because a doctor said it did. However, if you followed the story with the doctor that said it did, he falsified his information to make it look like it did, and he lost his medical license because of it, because he falsified data, and because of that, because he made up data to say that it actually caused autism. And I'm like, the unfortunate part is lots and lots of people believe it, same thing that they believe everything on Facebook and the internet, and have no longer vaccinated kids because of it. They're afraid of their kids getting autism, and kids unfortunately are suffering because of it. Another reason why people associate vaccines with autism is that, yes, if I go back to when you were getting lots and lots of shots, you are getting lots of shots, especially up until the age of 18 months. Lots of boosters, lots of vaccines, really to get your immune system exposed to everything. Because as you're a kid, you're dirty and you're going to be exposed to lots of things, so we want your immune system up to speed. The unfortunate part of this is that, yeah, it's around 18 months, and I'm like right around that date, 18 months to 2 years, that autism is usually diagnosed. That doesn't matter whether a kid had vaccines before that or not. It's the age that kids start to get diagnosed with autism. And unfortunately, everyone's like, but they had all these vaccines. Oh, and now they have autism. There must be a relation. Nope, it's just bad timing that we're trying to make your kids healthy, and unfortunately, at the same time, they also get diagnosed with autism. But it's easier to blame the vaccines. And I'm like, my little note for vaccine safety, and I'm like, the chance of a child having any type of allergic reaction to a vaccine is 1 in a million. And so this is kind of just showing you, and I'm like, it is more likely you will become a billionaire than having some type of a reaction to a vaccine, or more likely that you'll make the U.S. Olympic team, which I won't lie, 1 in 380,000, I feel like I have a shot. And I'm like, but it's really, really rare that there's going to be any type of reaction to a vaccine. Now, we're going to end there. We will pick up with the rest of the PowerPoint in lecture.